talk so that we kind of oxygenate the whole body and get the mind ready, kind of like tilling the soil. So once you're settled in, we're going to use the thumb and the ring finger of your right hand. So go ahead and make this shape if you can with your hand. And the thumb is going to block off the right nostril, and the ring finger is going to block the left nostril. And the pattern will be, I'll talk you through it, but just so you know going in, we'll take 5 breaths through both nostrils, then we'll raise the right hand, start by blocking the right nostril and inhaling through the left, blocking the left, exhaling through the right, and we'll do that pattern a few times, and then we'll switch, inhaling through the right, exhaling through the left, and we'll do that pattern for a little bit. So we'll try to do a minute each. So just start letting your hands sit on your knees, and you can close your eyes and just take 5 deep breaths in and out through your nose. So your lips are sealed, your jaw is relaxed, and your tongue, the tip of your tongue is right behind the top teeth where they meet the palate. Inhale, exhale 1, inhale, exhale 2, inhale, exhale 3, inhale, exhale 4, inhale, exhale 5. Take up your right hand, block off your right nostril with your thumb, inhale through the left, close left, exhale right, in left, out right, in left, out right, in left, out right. Continue with this pattern. With the next exhale, stay on your right side. Inhale through your right. Exhale left. Inhale right. Out left. In right, out left, in right, out left. Continue with this pattern. down. 5 deep breaths to both nostrils. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Take your hands in prayer in front of your heart. And if you want to chant along, you can look at the screen. There's the words for this prayer to Patanjali, invoking him. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaityakena yopakarotam pravaram munam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi abahu purushakaram shankachakrasidarinam sahasrashirsam shvetam pranamami patanjalim. It's always good to chant to Patanjali before you talk about him. I like that. Okay, so who is Patanjali, right? So he's known to have lived about 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. It's not exactly, we don't have an exact date for him because he's kind of a mystical person slash non-person. The story of how he came about is that his incarnation before he was Patanjali was the serpent godhead Adishesha, and he really wanted to experience the human form, and so he asked Lord Vishnu if he would grant him a human life. And so Vishnu let him know that he would have a human life, and in it he would bring to the human race a lot of wisdom in different formats. And so at the same time that this was going on, there was this really devoted yogini. Her name was Gonika, and she had been praying during her whole human incarnation to have a son. But she was about to, come to the end of this human life and still no son. So she gave this last prayer to the sun god, and she did this in a special way. She put a little bit of water in the palms of her hands in an Anjali mudra, and she gave that as an offering to the sun god, this special water. And as she was praying, she looked down into her hands, and a tiny little snake was in the palms of her hands. And this little snake quickly took the form of a human in her hands, and she named him Patanjali. And what Patanjali means is broken down into 2 words. Pata is coming down or falling down, and she was underneath a tree, so the story has it that this little snake fell from the tree. So Pata is falling, and then Anjali is the prayer mudra, right? And because she was in that kind of bowing down, surrendering position, so that's why his name is Patanjali. And he proceeded to write in his human incarnation. He wrote 3 very big, important texts. One, the Yoga Sutra. Another really important thing he brought was the Charaka Samhita, which is the sacred text on Ayurveda, and a book on grammar called the Mahavyasa. So these are his 3 gifts to humanity. He didn't himself write or come up with the knowledge of the Yoga Sutras or of yoga. He learned it from his teacher, but we don't know who his teacher was. But he just was clear that it wasn't his knowledge, it was given to him. The Yoga Sutras are a collection of 126 sutras, and what a sutra is a short sentence in Sanskrit. The beautiful thing about Sanskrit is that one word can be unpacked into so many things. One word has many meanings, and within one word you can break it down into different words. There's usually a root and then something that you add to the root. So sutras are this beautiful, infinite opportunity for learning, and that's why what I was saying before, that as you continue to evolve, you continue to unpack it in different ways. And so these sutras were organized into 4 chapters. The first one called Samadhipada, which is a description of the nature of the mind and of what yoga is, in terms of like the deeper meaning of yoga, not the physical part. And then Sadhanapada is the second chapter, which is the practice of yoga, right? He talks about how to do this yoga. And then the third chapter is Vibhutipada, which is about the superpowers, right? And a lot of those things that yogis do, like walking on fire, or laying on a bed of needles, or being able to teletransport themselves, being able to float, things like that, foresee things. If you believe in those things, that's supposedly what happens when you have a very dedicated practice, which means you've brought your mind into a very specific state. And then finally, Kaivalyapada, which is about the realization of self, right? The merging with consciousness, the universal consciousness, and realizing that we are, in essence, pure consciousness, and then freedom. It's nice to think about these sutras as like a mala bead, like a necklace, a mala necklace, where each bead is a sutra, right? And so the way that you use mala beads is that you kind of like thread them through, you use your thumb and you kind of do a repetition of a japa or mantra with each bead. And so sutras are kind of like that. You pause on one, you contemplate on, and you move on to the next. And traditionally, the way that you learn sutras, so when I go to India, which before the pandemic was every year, my sutra teacher there, we usually first spend about an hour to an hour and a half just chanting through all the chapters. And then we begin, she'll take 1 or 2 sutras and break them down. Usually it's one sutra. And it's in this really beautiful, very Indian living room, and she has all these books, all these different interpretations of sutras, and she'll usually pick one specific translation that she likes, and then she'll add on her thing. But that's the way you traditionally learn, is you sit in a circle with a teacher and you chant first, and then you pick one to learn that specific time. And if you're really traditional, you'll spend a lot of time just learning one. You're lucky if you get more than one. So that's the way that it's traditionally taught. If we had more time, we would do that, but we don't, so we're not going to do that. we're doing the untraditional way. In the sutras, Patanjali describes that there are 5 states of mind, and you can either, as you practice yoga, you can work through them, or you also, we come in, he believes that we come into this incarnation with, depending on what we've done in the past incarnation, with a certain quality of the mind. And so our work is to continue to move up, to put it somehow, or move linearly towards an arrested mind, right, which is the end goal. So these 5 states are restless, right, which is if you're a young soul, or this is one of your first incarnations, the mind will tend to be very restless and active, and just constantly creating formations, right? And then the next level to that is stupefied, which is easily distracted, or easily, impacted by what's coming at it, right? The senses are very, very like hungry to receive and take in. And then the next level to that is distracted. So there is some sense of inwardness, but it's still easily taken away from this concentration. And the next level would be you have some sort of grasp of concentration, and you're able to keep your mind one-pointed, so focused on one thing for a certain amount of time. And then after that comes completely arrested, right? So depending on where you're at, you are working towards eventually having a very still mind, where there is no movements or no formations created by what is around you. And there's a certain level of control of your senses that you need in order for your mind to do that. And so the practices of yoga that he describes in the sutras are geared to that, to bring the mind first into a clear, bring the body first into some sort of cleansed, to be a cleansed vehicle, so that then we can begin to work on the content of the mind and weaken the kleshas, which are, we'll look at it in the sutras, but they're afflictions, right? Work out the bonds that we come in karmically, so burn the seeds of impressions that we've come in with, and pave the way for the mind to be still, right? So we have to do all this kriya yoga, all this cleansing in order to get to that state. And so yoga is that daily cleansing, right? You come on the mat and that's what you're doing. Okay, so first one we're going to start with is the first sutra. And usually in these Sanskrit texts, whether it's the sutras or the Vedas or the Charaka Samhita, the first thing, like whatever the first word is in that text, is the most important it summarizes the whole text. So in this case is ata, which is now, which is a good omen to begin now. So I find that very interesting because, you know, a lot of the things that you hear about yoga is, especially, you know, all the meditation lineages, is that you can begin now being any moment, right? So I love that this is what the theme, right? The first word of the sutras is now, right? So at any point, whenever you lost your attention, just remember that now is the moment. And if you didn't hear what came before, you weren't meant to hear it, but you can hear what you need to hear now. So Atha Yoga Anushasanam is the first sutra, the first chapter. And the beautiful interpretation of that from Iyengar is, with prayers from divine blessings, now begins an exposition of the sacred art of yoga. And Iyengar tends to be very poetic, so his interpretations are always very long. Vyas, which we'll see a few interpretations in a few other sutras, are a little shorter. So that's where you see that there's so much space and room for interpretation. So Atha means now, or blessing, or prayer, right? But it's something that brings us in the now. So the prayer that we did before, the way that we begin a class by saying Om, or by just checking in with the breath, that's coming into now. We're doing the first sutra, right? Yoga is union, or the yolking, the coming together, the communion of the body, the mind, the spirit. And it is a contemplation on our higher self, right? On the Purusha. When we're practicing yoga, essentially what we're doing is we're contemplating our inner nature. We're using the vessel of the body to go deeper within, right? So as teachers, it's important that is what we're doing. It's not just the asana. So when you're threading together a sequence, it's nice to think about how is it yolking together? How is it coming together in a way that the person is not going to be distracted but can have this inward experience? How can I take myself out of the way? How can I make it less about me, more about them having an inward experience? Anushasanam is advice or direction or an instruction. So basically what Atha Yoga Anushasanam is now begins the instruction of yoga. And so he begins. And in terms of the context of this sutra, in the context of the Yoga Sutras, it is moving from an external experience into a more internal experience, right? It's an awareness that we are made up of different qualities. I'm not going to really go into the Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva thing right now, but we're made up of many different qualities, and when we're practicing yoga, when we're practicing this communion, we're bringing all these different qualities together and we're harmonizing them in the moment now. So that's what we're doing, so that eventually as we harmonize these different qualities, we're able to quiet the mind, to quiet the disruptions of the body, and to be focused in the moment. Okay, we're going to skip the second, where did I put this one? Yeah, we're going to skip the second one. No, here we go. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha is the second one. Yoga is the cessation of movements in the consciousness fluctuations of the mind. So yoga is basically the end of these constant noises that the mind is creating. Right? So you might notice that you go through you come to practice and your mind is really active and really busy thinking about all the things you have to do after, or some interaction that didn't go the way you wanted it to, or the food you ate and how it sat poorly, or anything, right? Those are kleshas. And you practice yoga, and hopefully if you've practiced with a good intention and dedication and nowness, by the end of it, you walk out and your mind is just there. You're just in your body. You're just presence. Nothing but presence. And it'll only last for a few seconds. Maybe if you're lucky, a few minutes. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll make it into the car until the first stoplight, and then someone will like zoom by and there you are, boom, back in your craziness. And we all do that, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be here studying this if we weren't doing that. So we all share that, and so it's important to know this because that's what we're doing, and so we can catch ourselves in the moment and begin again, right? So yoga, again, it's union, it's integration of all the different parts of the self. Chitta is consciousness, so there's different parts of the mind. There's the mind, which is the manas. There's the intellect, which is the buddhi, right? So the thing that I'm speaking to, the thing that in me is speaking to the thing in you is the buddhi, right? The buddhi, which is the intellect. And then there's ahamkara, which is the ego, right? Which is what we're trying to get a hold of as well as we do this. And it's also how we observe and how we reason, and it's our cognitive organ. It's the way that we are able to process what's coming at us and then kind of disperse it, label it, decide how we feel about it, figure out how to react to it. So all these actions are going on as we receive things. So that's the chitta. And so when we practice yoga, then you begin to understand that what you're doing is that you're creating space between what's coming at you and then how chitta reacts to all of those things, so that it's not so instant. You're not so worried about it. You have this space where you can pause, be here, understand that it's you don't have to react right away, but you can decide how you want to react to it. And then vrittis are the fluctuations of the mind, right? And so this affects your behavior, it affects your state of being, it affects the way that you act in the world, right? So depending on the amount of action, activity that you have in your mind, you will be more available to be in the moment or less available to be in the moment, right? If you're spinning things around, and you know, I happen to have a baby, so I speak a lot about examples with babies, so if anyone else here has a baby, you'll understand, but it's like you're going through, oh, I'm gonna make dinner, what do I need to do? And all of a sudden there's this thing in front of you that's like falling over and doing all these things, but you're so busy being up here that you can't attend to what's right there. So it's about creating the space to see that activity and realize that you are not that activity. Right? That is Yoga Chitta Nirodha. Nirodha is the cessation. So then you're taking it a step more forward and you're pausing it. That's the end goal of the yoga, which if one of you is able to reach that this lifetime, I congratulate you, because that is a very hard thing to do, right? But it's good to be aware of it and to see when you might be having that experience of total cessation of this constant movement, this constant digestion of information coming in and creation of new content in your mind. If I'm not making sense, please pause me. Okay, this is what I've been talking about. Okay, the third one is tada drashtu swarupe avastanam. Tada is now, as well as another way to say now. Drashtu is the seer. Swarupe, in his own, in his state. And then avastanam is rest or abides or dwells. So now the seer is able to abide in his own self. Right? So Iyengar interprets it as the seer abides in itself, and Vyas interprets it as then the seer dwells in his own true splendor. But the point being that when you're able to be here now, and you're able to, in the nowness, see the thoughts that are being created in your mind, and choose or refrain from interacting with them, and by that, stopping any other movements from happening, then you're able to abide in your true nature, right? So by doing yoga and by being the observer of that, you can have a sensation or an experience of the true self. Until then, you're just stuck in the unnecessary stuff that is not the truth, and then you suffer because you live in that, and you're in this false sense of self. Okay. And when you're able to be in this state of lack of fluctuations, lack of continuous movement of the mind, you feel really at peace, and you're able to like really see without labels, without preconceptions, without past experience serving as a filter to the now experience. So it's it's a nice thing. Okay, the fourth one is vritti swarupyam itaratra. At other times, the seer identifies with the fluctuating consciousness. Vyas says at other times, the seer appears to assume the form of the modification of the mind. Right? So we're here now, we've managed, we're paused, we've stopped the fluctuations of the mind, and because of that, we're able to see that we are not that which we see, or we are not that which sees, but we are beyond that. But if we're not able to do that, then we're stuck in that samsara, in that distressful life, that pain-causing life, right? So again, here vritti is the fluctuation or the modification of the state of mind, and then the other important word in this is swarupyam, which is we identify, right? We identify with that which we are not. And so part of this is, we'll see, I put it a little further down because it's part of the second chapter, but the kleshas, I'm just going to quickly jump into it for a second. The kleshas, there are five causes of suffering, and the first one being ignorance, vidya. So a lot of this is because the misidentification of, oh, this is me, this image, this hair, this eyes, this voice, that's me. And so because of that, that's the ignorance of, or the lack of knowledge that we are not that, but we are so much more expansive than that. We are beyond this. This is what's going to continue to change and eventually die, but our true essence never dies, and it's the same, mine to yours, it's all the same. So whenever we live in that awareness, or we make that shift, or even if we just ponder on it, it relieves a lot of suffering, because all of a sudden it's not so terrible when things happen, right? There's this higher understanding of what you are, this more in-depth experience of who you are. Okay. And chitta also, another important thing is that it, because it takes so much of your mental energy and of you're absorbed in this drama that's in your mind playing all the time, or in this love story that's playing in your mind, and then when it ends it creates such suffering, that it like clouds the way that you see and perceive reality. So we're all living in this, painted reality that's painted by the way that our mind is interpreting what's coming at it, right? So very few of us have a real picture of life as it is, impermanent and ever-changing, and imperfect and perfect at the same time. Okay. And then another important thing is that that stems out of these 4 sutras is that the mind is like a magnet. So it's whatever you're kind of making in your mind, you're attracting that. So I don't know if maybe that's kind of what when I stepped into the conversation with Liz, it sounded like it might be along these lines of like you're putting out there something that you wish for yourself, or the way that you wish to lead your life, or I don't remember exactly what it is that you were saying, Liz, but it's somewhere along those lines, I feel like. And so if you're creating these pure thoughts and you're setting these very purely true intentions that are established in ahimsa and non-harming, and in truthfulness, and in cleanliness, and in contentment, then you're attracting those qualities to yourself as well. So the interactions that come to you, the opportunities that come at you are very much a mirror of what you are projecting in your mind, right? And on the other hand, if you're in this like very negative mindset, all that you're allowing yourself to see is the negative, right? When you're like in a really bad mood, and like then it's raining, and then like the person you were supposed to see cancels on you, and then you like trip and you, I don't know, break your pants. Just all these negative things begin to happen, right? And it's all because that's what you're allowing yourself to see. I think it's what's her name? Pema Chodron has this in one of her books. She talks about the tiger. There's like a tiger following this man, and he jumps off the cliff to just, because he's not thinking, he's just trying to get out of this fearful situation. And as he falls, instead of realizing that he's falling and being like really in despair that he's falling and might die, he sees a bunch of like a bush of strawberries as he falls, and that's his last thought. He's like, oh, a bush of strawberries. So it's all about how we look at things and what we are opening ourselves up to seeing. So it's so wonderful as teachers, you begin to interact with other like-minded people, and then it's nice to put yourself into this channel of like seeing what is real, right? Which doesn't have to be pretty and beautiful, but it's real. Okay. Then we're skipping on to the 12th sutra. Abhyasa vairagyabhyam tannirodha. Abhyasa is dedicated practice, or also a practice that's done with repetition. So you pick sun salutations and you just do them every day with a certain amount of dedication and presence. And vairagyabhyam is freedom from desires, or freedom from attachment. So you're doing this practice, very dedicated practice, without being attached to what the outcome might be. And tannirodha is restraint or stilling. So because you're doing the practice in this way, you're stilling the mind and coming into an awareness of your true self. Iyengar says, practice and detachment are the means to still the movements of consciousness. Right? And detachment sounds very, like, oh, I don't care. But it's a very complicated and deeply rooted practice of self-observation. And it's one of the kleshas abhinivesha, which is, or raga actually, which is aversion, and like fear of change, abhinivesha. So it's a lot of being aware of that and creating space to those things. So when we're doing a repeated practice, we're able to begin to see and thread through the content of the mind, right? As it pops up, we can kind of label it and be like, oh, that's a thought that's creating suffering, and that's a thought that's creating joy, and then choosing to refrain from following through with the emotion. So that's how we can begin to generate that detachment, right? We don't just follow through with each thought that comes up, but we develop enough mental strength that we can see it, label it, choose to not follow through with it. And then with that also comes a certain freedom from desire, right? So the desire arises, you see the desire as it comes to you, and then you choose to be in the moment now and just see it as a desire and not become the desire, right? Like we saw in Sutra 4. Sutra 3 is you don't become the desire, you just see it. Sutra 4 is you become the desire because there's not enough mental strength. So that's the practice. And you just check in with yourself, and if you see where you're at with that, right? Okay. And then when you're able to begin to do this, the last klesha, which is abhinivesha, or the fear of death, or the clinging to life, you begin to be able to work towards that a little bit, right? Which is the end goal, is that you're not afraid of death, you're not afraid of life ending or changing, that you're able to detach yourself from that, because you have this deep understanding that you are not this body, you are beyond that, you are this pure consciousness. And so a good thing to practice as practitioners and as teachers is to do what you do with devotion and with continuity and with discipline, right? You just keep showing up with this very truthful quality. And if you don't have that, then it's better to not practice, because you're just planting future karma, right? So just check yourself and create the opportunity for the practice to be rooted in this deeply devotional place within yourself. Okay, this is my all-time favorite. Satudirga kala nairantarya satkara sevito drida bhumihi. This is the 14th of the first chapter, and Iyengar interprets it as long, uninterrupted, alert practice is the firm foundation of restraining the fluctuations. There's what I love about this is that the long time without interruption and with dedication, right? It's a long time, right? So it's not about, oh, I'm gonna do this course and I'm gonna gain all this knowledge and tomorrow I'll go on the mat and it'll all be different. It won't. It's all about showing up every day with the awareness that it's work every day, right? That you always have the choice of being attached, of not disconnecting from, not being aware that you're not the seer. It's a very hard practice. So dedicating to it for a long time and continuing to see your evolution or your involution on the path, right? So Dirga Kala is for a long time. Nairantarya, without interruption, continuous. Satkara is dedication. And Asevita with earnestness, so with truthfulness, right? Which is also one of the yamas and niyamas that we're going to see. Drita bhumihi, of firm ground, firmly rooted, well fixed, right? So it has deep roots, right? So you're not trying to jump ahead a few steps, but you're really being truthful about where you are on the path, and you're taking it one step at a time. And I think as teachers, it's also important that you cultivate a steady practice so that when you go teach, you're not teaching something that you haven't fully understood, but you're teaching from a place of of earnestness, right? And not trying to teach something that you haven't fully understood yet, and that could be, you know, you start to learn something and that's what you teach, and then you learn a little more and that's what you teach. So it's not that you don't know, that we don't know anything, but we're continuously learning, we're continuously figuring it out. And so that's good to know, because you don't have to know it all. No one knows it all. But there needs to be a dedication and a commitment to the practice. And another reason why I love this sutra that also Iyengar speaks about is, and Vyas, is that whenever we are practicing in this way, we begin to see the true wisdom. We begin to dissociate ego, mind, and truth, right? And there comes, out of that comes this humility, right? And that's why it's so important to have a teacher that you can trust and that you can practice under. No matter how many years you've been a teacher, you will always, it's always good to be a student, whether of a teacher or of a text, depending on where you're at on the journey, and to be fully established in wisdom, right, in knowledge. Any questions? Okay, this one is a long one. Vyadi sthana samshaya pramada lasya virati vranti darshana labda bhumikatvana vastitatvani chitta vikshepaste nantarayaha. So it's describing a lot of different steps. There's, I think, 5 or maybe more, can't remember, complications in the path of yoga that will get in our way to understand and get to the cessation of the vrittis, of the fluctuations of the mind. And these obstacles are physical disease, right? So whenever you are, whether it's injured or you have a physical ailment of sorts, you can't show up to the mat, you can't do your asana practice, or you're in such pain that you can't even sit and meditate. And so you lose trust in the practice. Let's say you've injured yourself doing yoga. You kind of begin to doubt, is this right for me? Is this hindering me? Instead of thinking, oh, how am I showing up differently with not so much presence perhaps that I have gotten injured. We right away think like, oh, let me doubt the practice instead of myself, right? And so the mind begins to get really distracted. Because whenever we doubt, we are distracted. Doubt is good. I'm not saying you shouldn't doubt. Doubt can be very good, and there should always be questioning. But a good questioning, right? That's questioning the right thing, yourself. And so the opposite of physical disease is having a practice that is rooted in deep listening and that will heal your body, right? And that might be just doing one asana, one breathing practice that will help your circulation to go so that you can bring not only oxygen into your limbs and into your vessels, but also circulation into your ligaments and your bones so that you can remove the disease, the discomfort. So physical disease is one obstacle. Mental laziness and sluggishness is the second obstacle that's preventing you from walking the path of yoga. And that would be like, there's a physical element, and so you become lazy and your mind becomes very sloppy, and then you start seeing reality through that lens of sluggishness, of mental just blur. And we've all experienced that at some point in our lives, I'm pretty sure. So the opposite of that, and how we come back to the path, would be swadhyaya, which is learning, like self-observation, studying of sacred textures, reading, watching things that are inspiring, interacting with people that will inspire us to get back on the path, and deep introspection, right? Sitting and really looking at the situation and being like, okay, why did I have this pain? Why do I have this discomfort? And why am I reacting this way? So it's an opportunity for deeper looking, right? Third one is doubt or indecision, right? And so whenever we're sick, let's say that we've injured ourselves doing the practice and we are not able to practice, or our mind becomes lazy and we begin to doubt, or we begin to feel insecure about what we're doing. And so we walk even further away from the mind, from the path, right? The mind is just generating these thoughts. And so the opposite of that would be truthfulness, practicing being really realistic. And again, how you do that is you continue to read texts that are based in reality, right? So the sutras or the Vedas or the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita, you come back to the path in this way, and you trust, because if your practice is rooted in what we saw in Sutra 14, dedicated for a long time, based in humility and like bowing down, then it'll be easier to come back, right, from doubt. The next one is carelessness. So these are like one after the other, right? So we've injured ourselves, our mind gets sluggish, we begin to feel lazy, we begin to feel doubt, and now we're just careless. We don't care anymore. All the things we've worked up to now to find a place in the mind where we feel more steady, more quiet, more inwards. Now we just don't care, right? Our environment begins to be, we don't clean up ourselves, we don't clean up our environment, we don't care about our interactions. And so how we get back on the path, we have the yamas and niyamas, which we'll look at later. We have these moral codes, ethical moral codes that help us to come back in, right? And so we can use them to see, like, am I harming myself? Am I harming someone else? Am I being truthful to myself? Am I able to feel content in some way or form? So we look at those to come back. Then physical laziness, right? So we're injured, our mind is beginning to get lazy, we begin to doubt, we become careless, and then our physicality also, we just let it go, and then we just become couch potatoes. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with laying on your couch, but the intention has to be clear about that. So when we're physically lazy, then we have all these more ailments coming to us, right? Our health our choices of food might not be proper for our constitution, and we might just continue to create more tamas, more like downward energy. So now we're in this state where the mind is so covered, we're so unable to access and create space in the mind. It's just this heavy blob, tamasic heavy blob of really human form. And so the opposite of physical laziness would be applying some tapas, applying a little bit of fire, right? Get back on the mat, rebuild a discipline of some sort. And that might be we're just setting up an alarm for 6 a.m. instead of 11 a.m., right? So you integrate discipline. That's how Patanjali suggests. And this one really taps into some of the kleshas, which we'll see later on, and the ignorance and the aversion and the desires and the anger and the clinging, all those things. And then the next one is avirati, which is the lack of control. So we've hurt our bodies, our minds become lazy, we begin to doubt, we get forget the one in between, but we get lazy about our situation, we become careless, and now we just don't have any control, right? We just have no control over our mind. Whatever comes, we react, right? And you might know a person like that, where you say something to them and right away they just attack you because their ego is so prominent that the first reaction is to just right away respond, right? Versus a person that you say something to and there's like a pause, and the person just takes a moment to kind of take it in and let it sit, and then there's an interaction, right? So the lack of control is the way that we respond, the way that we make choices. It's very ego-based. So again, the opposite of that is dedication, it's discipline, it's truthfulness, it's self-observation, it's cleanliness. Okay, and then one more, the false perception. So we have all these things, and now we're just stuck in this world where it's just not what it is, right? We believe that we are what we see. We believe that we are the mental experience that we're having. We believe that life is happening to us and at us, and we're just the victims of it all. And so we are just so helpless. And that's when you've really fallen off the path of yoga. And so one of the great questions that to take yourself out of this, or that Patanjali suggests we do when we're in this state, is that we ask ourselves, who am I? Why was I practicing? Why would I practice, right? And even though in this state it might be a little hard to bring that up, if you have good friends and if you have good notes, you pull them out and you just sit there and you ask yourself, who am I, right? Why am I here? And you move through the layers, right? You're not here to suffer. You're not here to be in this state that's all up in your mind. You're here to be within yourself and to interact from that place. So you're not identifying, you're no longer identifying, when you live in that state, you're not identifying with all that is here. Does this make sense? Questions? Okay. So, false perception, we have two more. Alabdha bhumi, which is the inability to hold on to what is achieved. So we're so helpless, we've lost control, we're just so far off the path that we're unable to hold on to whatever we have come to up to now, in terms of not, it could also be objects, but mainly the spiritual practice, right? All that we've built up to now, we've just lost, all because we got injured, right? That's how poorly rooted the practice was, that just one little slip made it all fall apart. So again, it's important to ask yourself, like, every day, why am I practicing? Why am I doing the practice of teaching? Why am I doing the practice of practicing? So that if things go wrong, it's not just something that's happened and you never thought about it, but you have it's deeply rooted, right? Satudirga kala nairantarya satka, the Sutra 14, you're deeply rooted in yourself. Okay, and then slipping or inability to maintain the reach state is the next thing that happens. So you continue to, anything you try to grasp onto, there's no mental strength to hold on to it. So you just keep slipping away, further away from the sense of nowness, from the sense of I'm not the seer, from the sense of having a grip on what's the content of the mind, right? You can't even be here for a breath. And the end of that is that you are left with this very dispersed and fragmented mind, that anything that happens, you're just pulled in that direction. That something else happened, you're pulled in that direction, right? And that is samsara. That is like this endless cycle of suffering. So if you get there, it'll be a little harder to pull yourself out. So very important that you always ask yourself, why is it that I'm practicing? What is it I'm doing? Who am I? These are very good thoughts to have. Okay. Next one. Let me check on time. Okay. We'll do two more and then we'll take, actually we'll do three more and then we'll do a little physical movement. Okay. Dukkha daurmanasya angameja yatvasa prashvasa vikshepa sahabhuvaha. Okay, sorrow, despair, unsteadiness of the body, irregular breathing further distract the mind. So dukkha is pain, daurmanasya is mental afflictions, angameja yattva is unsteadiness of the body, swasa praswasa is irregular breathing, vikshepa is scattered or concurrent. So whenever we are in this state of despair, of the body being unsteady, the mind being pulled in all directions, right, from the things that we've seen before, then everything is just, the ground is not steady, right? There's a lot of opportunities for new obstacles to come in and new afflictions to come in. So it's important to just be really aware, as you practice more and more, become really sensitive about your body. One day you might come to the mat and you might feel like, oh, there's something that's bothering me in the general area of my abdomen, and then you continue to practice and that refines and you're able to be like, oh, that might be my liver or it might be my adrenal. So there's as you continue to practice, continue to fine-tune your sensitivity to yourself so that when something happens, it doesn't just overwhelm you. You don't become that. You take that as an opportunity to tune in even more and become this kind of like explorer of your own self. And dukkha, the opposite of dukkha is sukha, which is good space. So what we're trying to do is have this information, this knowledge, so that we can move from a place of dukkha, of pain, into a space of sukha, good space, right? Which can still have distractions and afflictions. You know, that's part of the human experience, but we don't identify with that. We don't become that. We are just observers of that. Very intricate practice, but I think just being aware of it, you can begin to see it, right? The next time something happens, you'll just catch yourself. And so 3 ways of seeing, of learning to create that inner kind of listening device is when something happens, just observe. Is it something that you created for yourself? Is it self-inflicted? Is it something that's an imbalance in my body that's caused by an external factor? Like maybe it's been very windy and you know that when it's windy you get agitated because your vata element gets whacked out. Or if it's very hot outside and you're like doing stuff that's creating more heat, like you're running a lot and you're eating spicy food and you're taking hot showers, you're having interactions that are very agitated and involve jealousy and anger, like you're creating imbalance because there's too much of that. So you could look at that, like what are external factors that could be throwing me off of balance? And then problems that come by fate. And you know, our society in the United States, unless you have some sort of religious, you have a religion that you believe in, fate is not so much, or you know, if you are a spiritual person of any kind, you might believe in fate, but like in India, it's all about fate. Like your whole life, from the moment you're born into a caste, and that's your fate. So this is why Patanjali, you know, this is one of the 3 types of sufferings, something that is beyond you, right? And like this pandemic, it is beyond us. We didn't generate it for ourselves. Well, maybe we did, but not any of us anyway. So it's beyond ourselves. We cannot control it. And so it's just good to have an awareness of where is it coming from, so you can take the next step to create that space that you are not that. It's a roadmap. Okay, now we're moving into the, let me just see where we're at. Okay, we're almost halfway through. So let's do 2 more, and then we'll take a short break. Okay. Sthira Sukham Asanam, and some of you might have heard this one. Asana is perfect firmness of body, steadiness of intelligence, and benevolence of spirit. There's Iyengar for you. The asana should be firm and well established and done with a good intention, basically, right? So again, sukha, what I was talking about before, dukkha is pain or bad space, sukha is good space. So we're with each asana, anytime we go into an asana, we're trying to create a good space for the mind to rest in and for the essence, the pure consciousness that we are to rest in. And we are fixing our attention, we're fully present, right? And by doing that, we're creating a deep steadiness of the body, of the nervous system, and because of that, of the mind. Until the body is not steady, the nervous system is not steady, the mind has 0 chances of being steady. So in the system of Ashtanga Yoga, the primary series is Yoga Chikitsa. It's all about that. It's about cleansing the physical body. And then the second series is all about cleansing the nervous system so that we can sit, so that those 2 things are not creating ailments, so that the mind can have the space that it needs in order to sit without fluctuations, without content. And when we practice in this way, there is like a natural sense of joy and a natural sense of communion, of oneness that arises from practicing in this way. And then naturally we move from, into a state of dharana, which then moves into a state of dhyana, which is the absorption. So dharana is like extended concentration, and then dhyana is just you don't have to think about concentrating. You are concentration. So when we practice in this way, we're able to achieve that or move towards that. Avidya asmita raga dvesha abhinivesha kleshaha. So these are the kleshas. We'll pause after this. I think this is a good place to stop. So there are 5 afflictions which disturb the equilibrium of consciousness. And these are ignorance, ego, attachment to pleasure, aversion, fear of death, or clinging to life. So avidya is ignorance, right? So if we are unable to see the truth that we are not that which we see, we are not that which we think, we're not that which we experience emotionally, we are beyond that, then we're going to suffer, right? Asmita, ego. If we identify with everything that comes at us, we experience it is happening to me, right? Or that person is being upset with me, or I didn't get that job because I wasn't good enough, or whatever it might be. That's your ego, right? It's this pride, it's I, right? So that's the ignorance of mistaking the experience of who we are as the I-ness, right? But we're not that. And you go back to the three ways of understanding. Is it because of fate? Is it because of something that I've created for myself, or is it an external thing, like something that's external from me, but that I can still change and control in some way or form? Raga is desire or attachment, a desire to pleasure, right? We seek to feel good. We seek to have pleasurable experiences. And so when we get too attached to that, it's dangerous, right? It's the ego, it's the ignorance that's kicking in. Right? You go away for a weekend, and you're on this nice beach and you're relaxed and everything is perfect, and you go back home and you just wish that you were still there, and everything is so miserable when you're not there. That's that desire, that attachment to that which is not. I mean, that was, but it's no longer, and that's what it is. So this is kind of what he's pointing at. Are you guys still there? I just lost you all. think that meant we needed to take a break because my whole computer just shut down. Can you guys hear me? Liz, can you guys hear me? Okay, I think that was a clear message that we need to take a break because my whole computer just shut down. So let's take just a 2-minute break. If you need to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. If not, go to your mat. We're just gonna do a short little movement session before we move into the next few sutras.